Chapter 7. Scrawny with Potential. Tiger Salazar was going places. After a life of wasting time on taking up space, he was now professionally paid to waste time and take up space. He couldn't imagine a better life for himself, and with all the brushing shoulders with sides, he knew that eventually one of them would take notice of him. He figured that he might have a ring held out to him and get a year of immunity. He never expected one of them would hire Tiger for a permanent position, much less aside from another region. "You entertained us at a party last year," the woman on the phone had said. "We liked your style." She offered him more than twice the money he was making, gave him an address and a date and time to be there. When he got off the train, he immediately knew he wasn't in Mid-America anymore. In the Texas region, the official language was Mortal English, spoken with a sort of musical accent. It was close enough to common that Tiger could understand it, but working so hard exhausted his brain. It was like listening to Shakespeare. Everybody dressed a little different and walked with a very cool swagger that he could get used to. He wondered how long he'd get to be here. Long enough, and he'd be able to buy himself that car his parents never would, so he wouldn't have to take public cars everywhere. The meeting was in a city called San Antonio, and the address turned out to be the penthouse suite of a high-rise overlooking a little river. He assumed a party might already be going on, a perpetual one. That couldn't have been farther from the truth. He was greeted at the door not by a servant, but by a scythe, a woman with dark hair and a slight Venetian leaning, who looked familiar. "Tiger Salazar, I presume." "You presume, right?" He stepped in. The decor was ornate, which he expected. What he didn't expect was the complete absence of other guests. But as he once told Rowan, he went where the day took him. He could roll with whatever got thrown his way. He thought she might offer him food, or maybe a drink after his long voyage, but she didn't. Instead, she looked him over, like one might look over livestock at an auction. "I like your rope," he told her, figuring flattery couldn't hurt. "Thank you," she said. "Take off your shirt, please." Tiger sighed. So it was going to be that kind of encounter. Again, he couldn't have been more wrong. Once his shirt was off, she studied him even more closely. She had him flex his biceps and checked how solid they were. "Scrawny," she said, "but there's potential." "What do you mean, scrawny? I work out." "Not enough," she told him, "but that's an easy fix." Then she backed away, assessed him for a moment more, and said, "Physically, you wouldn't be anyone's first choice, but under the circumstances, you're absolutely perfect." Tiger expected more, but she offered nothing else. "Absolutely perfect for what?" "You'll know when it's time for you to know." And then finally it clicked, and excitement swept through him. "You're choosing me to be an apprentice." For the first time, she grinned. "Yes, you could say that," she said. "No, man, this is the best news ever. You won't be disappointed. I'm a quick learner and I'm smart. I mean, not school smart, but don't let that fool you. I've got brains up the wazoo." She took a step closer and smiled. The emeralds on her bright green robe caught the light and sparkled. "Trust me," said Scythe Rand. "For this apprenticeship, your brains aren't going to matter at all." Part 2. Harm's Way. Before I assumed stewardship of the world, Earth had a maximum sustainability of 10 billion. After that, saturation would have set in, leading to starvation, suffering, and the complete collapse of society. I changed that harsh reality. It is amazing how much human life a well-managed ecosystem can sustain. And by well-managed, I mean managed by me. Humanity itself is simply incapable of juggling the variables, but under my stewardship, even though the human population has multiplied exponentially, the world feels far less crowded, and thanks to the various reef canopy and subterranean territories I've helped to create, open spaces are even more plentiful than in the mortal age. Without my continuous intervention, this delicate balance would collapse under its own gravity. I shudder to think of the suffering such a planetary implosion would cause. Thank goodness I am here to prevent it. The Thunderhead. Chapter 8. Under no circumstances. Grison Tolliver loved the Thunderhead. Most people did, for how could they not? It held no guile, no malice, no agenda, and always knew exactly what to say. It existed simultaneously everywhere on every computer in the world. It was in everyone's home, a curving invisible hand on one's shoulder. And even though it could speak to more than 1 billion people simultaneously, without taxing its consciousness, it gave each person the illusion that it was giving him or her its undivided attention. The Thunderhead was Grison's closest friend, mainly because it had raised him. His parents were serial parents. They loved the idea of having families, but loathed raising them. Grison and his sisters were his father's 5th family, and his mother's 3rd. They had tired of this new batch of offsprings quickly, and when they began to shirk their parental responsibilities, the Thunderhead took up the slack. It helped Grison with his homework, it advised him on how to behave and what to wear on his first date, and although it could not exhibit a physical presence at his high school graduation, it took pictures of him from every possible angle, and had a fine meal delivered for him when he arrived home. That was more than he could say for his parents, who were off in Panacea on a food-tasting excursion. Not even his sisters came. They were both at different universities, and it was finals week. They made it clear that expecting them to show up at his high school graduation was pure selfishness on Grison's part, but the Thunderhead was there for him, as it always was. "I am so very proud of you, Grison," the Thunderhead had told him. "Did you tell that to the millions of others who graduated today?" Grison asked. "Only the ones of whom I am truly proud," the Thunderhead responded. "But you, Grison, are more special than you know." Grison Tolliver did not believe he was special. There was no evidence that he was anything beyond ordinary. He figured that the Thunderhead was just being its usual comforting self. The Thunderhead, however, always meant what it said. Grison was not influenced or coerced into a life of service to the Thunderhead. It was his choice. To work for the Authority interface as a Nimbus agent had been in his heart for years. He never told the Thunderhead, for fear that it might not want him or try to talk him out of it. When he finally submitted his application for the American Nimbus Academy, the Thunderhead simply said, "It pleases me," then had put him in touch with other like-minded teens in and around his neighborhood. His experience with those kids was not what he expected. He found them remarkably boring. "Is that how people see me?" he had asked the Thunderhead. "Am I as dull as they are?" "I don't believe you are," the Thunderhead told him. "You see, many come to work for the Authority interface because they lack the creativity to find a truly stimulating profession. Others feel powerless and have a need to experience power vicariously. These are the lackluster ones, the boring ones, who ultimately become the least effective Nimbus agents. Rare are those, as yourself, whose longing to serve is a mark of character." The Thunderhead was right. Grison did want to serve, and wanted to do so with no ulterior motive. He didn't want power or prestige. Granted, he did like the idea of the crisp grey suits and sky blue ties that all Nimbus agents wore, but that was far from his motivation. The Thunderhead had simply done so much for him, he wanted to give something back. He could not imagine a higher calling than being its representative, maintaining the planet and working for the betterment of humankind. While scythes were made or broken in a 1-year apprenticeship, becoming a Nimbus agent was a 5-year process. 4 years of study, followed by a year out in the field as a journeyman agent. Grison was prepared to devote his 5 years of preparation, but barely 2 months into his studies at the American Nimbus Academy, he found that his path was barred. His schedule, which consisted of classes in history, philosophy, digital theory, and law, suddenly appeared blank. For reasons unknown, he had been dropped from all of his classes. Was this a mistake? How could it be? The Thunderhead did not make mistakes. Perhaps he reasoned class schedules were left to human hands, and were subject to human error. So he went to the school's registrar, hoping to get to the bottom of it. Nope, said the registrar, with neither surprise nor compassion. No, hero. It says here you're not enrolled in any classes. There's a message in your file, though. The message was simple and unambiguous. Grayson Tolliver was to report to the local authority interface headquarters immediately. What for? He asked, but the registrar had nothing for him but a shrug and a glance over Grayson's shoulder to the next person in line. Although the Thunderhead itself did not require a place of business, its human counterparts did. In every city, in every region, there was an office of the authority interface, where thousands of Nimbus agents worked to maintain the world, and did the job well. The Thunderhead had managed to achieve something unique in the history of humanity, a bureaucracy that actually worked. The offices of the authority interface, or AI, as it was commonly called, were not ornate, nor were they conspicuously austere. Every city had a building that harmonized within architectural surroundings. In fact, one could often pick out the local AI headquarters by simply looking for the building that appeared to most belong. In Fulcrum City, the capital of Mid-America, it was a solid building of white granite and dark blue glass. At 67 stories, it hit the average height for the downtown area. Once, the Mid-American Nimbus agents attempted to convince the Thunderhead to build a taller tower that might impress the population, and even the world. I do not need to impress, the Thunderhead had responded to the disappointed Nimbus agents, and if you feel the need of the authority interface to stand out in the world, perhaps you need to reevaluate your priorities. Suitably chastised, the Mid-American Nimbus agents returned to work with their proverbial tails between their legs. The Thunderhead was power without hubris. Even in their disappointment, the Nimbus agents were heartened by its incorruptible nature. Grayson felt out of a place once he pushed his way through the revolving door into the polished marble vestibule. Light grey marble, the same color as all the suites around him. He had no suit to wear. The closest he could come was a mildly wrinkled pair of slacks, a white shirt, and a green tie that was a bit lopsided no matter how many times he tried to adjust it. The Thunderhead had given him that tie as a gift a few months before. He wondered if it knew, even then, that he would be called in for this meeting. A junior agent who had been waiting for him greeted him at the reception. She was pleasant and perky, and shook his hand a little too vigorously. "I've just begun my year of fieldwork," she said. "I have to say, I've never heard of a freshman called into the headquarters." She wouldn't stop shaking his hand as she spoke. It began to feel awkward, and he wondered which would be worse, allowing her to continue pumping his hand up and down, or withdrawing it from her grasp. Finally, Grayson rescued his hand from her grip, feeling a need to scratch his nose. "Either you've done something very good or very bad," she said. "I haven't done anything," he told her, but clearly she didn't believe him. She led him to a comfortable salon with two tall-backed leather chairs, a bookshelf of classic volumes, and generic knickknacks, and in the middle a coffee table with a silver platter of tea cakes and a matching pitcher of ice water. It was a standard audience room, designed for the times that a human touch was needed when relating to the Thunderhead. It troubled Grayson, because he always spoke to the Thunderhead directly. He couldn't begin to guess what this was all about. A few minutes later, a slim Nimbus agent, who already seemed tired even though the day had barely begun, came in and introduced himself as Agent Traxler. This man was of that first category that the Thunderhead had spoken of, the uninspired. He sat across from Grayson and made obligatory small talk. "I trust you found your way here easily, blah blah blah. Have a tea cake, they're very good, blah blah blah." Grayson was sure the man said the same exact things to everyone he had an audience with. Finally, he got down to business. "Do you have an idea why you were called here?" he asked. "No," Grayson told him. "Yes, I suppose you wouldn't." Then why even ask? Grayson thought, but didn't dare say it aloud. "You were called here because the Thunderhead wished for me to remind you of the rules of our agency with regards to the Thighhood." Grayson was insulted, and didn't even try to hide it. "I know the rules." "Yes, but the Thunderhead wished for me to remind you." "Why didn't the Thunderhead remind me itself?" Agent Traxler released an exasperated sigh. one that he probably practiced often. As I said, the Thunderhead wished for me to remind you. This was going nowhere. Alright then, said Grison, realizing that his own frustration had slipped over the line into disrespect. He backpedaled. I appreciate the fact that you've taken a personal interest in this, Agent Draxler. You can consider me fully reminded. He reached for his tablet. Shall we go over the rules? Grison took in a slow breath and held it, because he imagined, if he didn't, it might come out as a scream. What was the Thunderhead thinking? When he got back to his dorm room, he'd have to have a nice long conversation with it. He was not above arguing with the Thunderhead. In fact, they argued regularly. Of course, the Thunderhead always won, even when it lost, because Grison knew it lost those arguments on purpose. Clause 1 of the separation of Scythe and State, Draxler began, and continued reading for the better part of an hour, occasionally checking in with Grison with, "Are you still with me?" and "Did you get that?" Grison would either not say yes, or when he felt it was called for, repeat back word for word what Draxler had said. When Draxler was finally done, rather than putting down his tablet, he pulled up 2 images. "Now for a quiz." He showed the images to Grison. The first he recognized immediately as Scythe Curie, her long silver hair and lavender robe a giveaway. The second was a girl his age. Her turquoise robe testified to her being a Scythe as well. "If the Thunderhead were legally allowed to do so," Agent Draxler said, "it would warn Scythe Curie and Scythe Anastasia that there is a credible threat to their lives. The kind of threat from which there would be no possibility of revival. If the Thunderhead or one of its agents warned them, which clause of the separation of Scythe and State would be violated?" Clause 15, paragraph 2. "Actually, clause 15, paragraph 3, but close enough." He put down the tablet. "What are the consequences for a Nimbus Academy student warning the tour side of this threat?" Grison said nothing for a moment. The thought of the consequences was enough to chill his blood. "Expulsion from the academy." Permanent expulsion," Draxler said. "The student may never apply to that Nimbus Academy or any other ever again." Grison glanced down at the little green tea cakes. He was glad he hadn't eaten any, because he might just have curled them back into Agent Draxler's face. Then, again, he might have felt much better if he had. He imagined Agent Draxler's pinched face dripping with puke. It was almost enough to make him smile. Almost. "Then we are clear that you are, under no circumstances, to warn Scythe Anastasia and Scythe Curie of the threat." Grison heaved a false shrug. "How could I warn them? I don't even know where they live." "They live in a rather famous landmark residence called Falling Water, the address of which is very easy to find," Agent Draxler told him, then said, as if Grison hadn't heard him the first time, "If you warn them of the threat which you now know about, you will face the consequences we discussed." Then Agent Draxler promptly left to prepare for another audience without as much as a goodbye. It was dark by the time Grison got back to his dorm room at the academy. His roommate, a boy who was almost as enthusiastic as the handshaking junior Nimbus agent, wouldn't shut up. Grison just wanted to slap him. "My ethics teacher just assigned us an analysis of mortal age court cases. I got something called Brown versus the Board of Education, whatever that is, and my digital theory teacher wants me to write a paper on Bill Gates, not the Scythe but the actual guy. And don't even ask me about philosophy." Grison let him drone on, but stopped listening. Instead, he ran everything that happened at the AI through his mind one more time, as if reevaluating it might somehow change it. He knew what was expected of him. The Thunderhead could not break the law, but he could. Of course, as Agent Draxler had pointed out, there would be severe consequences if he did. He cursed his own conscience, because being the person that he was, how could he not warn Scythe's Anastasia and Curie, no matter what the consequences? "Did you get any assignments today?" his blabbermouthed roommate asked. "No," Grison told him flatly. "I was given the opposite of an assignment." "Lucky you." Somehow, Grison didn't feel all that lucky. I rely on the bureaucracy of the authority interface to handle the governmental aspects of my relationships with humankind. Nimbus agents, as they are called, provide an easy to understand physical form to my governance. I don't have to do this. I could handle it all myself if I wanted to. It is fully within my power to create a robotic body for myself, or a team of robotic bodies that could hold my consciousness. However, long ago I determined that it would not be a good idea. It's troubling enough that people imagine me as a storm cloud. If people picture me in some sort of physical form, it would distort their perception of me, and I might enjoy it too much. For my relationship with humanity to remain pure, I must remain pure, mind only, sentient software with no flesh, no physical form. I do have camera pods that roam the world to augment my stationary cameras, but I am not present in any of them. They are nothing more than rudimentary sensory organs. The irony, however, is that with no body, the world itself becomes my body. One might think this would make me feel grand, but it doesn't. If my body is the earth, then I am nothing more than a speck of dust in the vastness of space. I wonder what it would be like then if my consciousness were to someday span the distance between stars. The Thunderhead.